bring in ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Does he weigh in on FSU being left out of the playoffs, or
just talk about UConn?
The battle over funding for Ukraine. His pick. What do you think?
Yeah, you go ahead, Congressman. The floor is yours.
Mika, first of all, I just can't believe we're going to intrude on this, 15-minute conversation of college football with things like the Ukraine war and U.S. national security. What are we thinking this morning?
Exactly. So we'll move on.
So let's talk about Ukraine and the funding for Ukraine. And I find it hard as a former Republican, a Reagan Republican,
What's going on?
A guy that grew up believing that you did everything you could to deter Russian aggression and the invasion of other countries, that you've got a Republican Party that is giving Vladimir Putin the keys to Kyiv.
Not just Vladimir Putin the keys to Kyiv, but who do you think is watching what's happening right now closer than anybody else? President Xi of China, because we know what he wants on Taiwan. And you know what he's learning? He's learning that we're getting tired, or more to the point, Joe, as you point out, the Republican Party gets tired after 18 months of a difficult war. Yeah, where's the United States of World War II, where we stood the course? And look, let's make it broader than that. One of the first things this new speaker does is completely unprecedented. He says we'll give Israel aid, $15 billion. And this is, all of a couple of weeks after the brutal attack of October 7th. We'll do that aid, but only if the Congress agrees to rescind President Biden's, augmenting of the IRS's 1970s computer systems. Never, ever have we said, put quote unquote conditions, much less domestic partisan conditions on Israel aid. So now that we're at real risk of walking out of Ukraine, we're at real risk of fighting forever over Israel aid, which is sorely needed. Yeah. And of course, the other thing that's getting hung up is a direct aid for Taiwan. So, Joe, you nailed it. This party of Reagan, this party that stood, and said, we will lead the world, is now making up completely ridiculous things like, unless you give us border security, which, by the way, we're totally willing to do, we need to do that first before we do Ukraine. Folks, this is a country that can do a couple of things at once.
Hey, Congressman, no one asked me for my take, so I'm just going to put it in quickly, unsolicited. Taylor Swift's boyfriend is not on any of these teams, so I had no idea what any of you were talking about.
Fair point, Jeff. Fair point. That's also the NFL, but go on.
I want to ask you about this conversation around assurances or conditions that Democrats are getting a little bit louder about. Bernie Sanders said that he would be voting against the aid today because he doesn't think there's sufficient strings attached to this aid in terms of what Israel is doing with U.S. funding. How do you feel on this issue, and do you feel strongly enough that you would ultimately maybe vote against aid?
Yeah, and again, let's go back to what I just said. Traditionally in the Congress, the idea of putting conditions of any kind onto aid to Israel was unheard of. The premise was always that, the IDF moves with lawyers. They move with the values that we share. Now, there's a whole conversation about whether that has happened in Gaza or not. But again, that barn door has been opened wide by this new speaker, who not just put a condition on Israel aid, but that condition was the rewinding of the Biden program to augment this 1970s COBOL computer era IRS. So imagine where we go from here. Let's imagine the shoe is on the other foot and you've got a Democratic majority. And because of what Speaker Johnson did, well, now we're going to approve, Israel aid 2 years from now, but you've got to give a single payer health care or do the Green New Deal. I can't stress how dangerous it is. I mean, look, let's talk about the conduct of the IDF's war in Gaza. That's a legitimate conversation. But to start saying that unless you give me X, Y, or Z, my partisan political priorities, sorry, Israel gets it in the head, that is unheard of.
Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, thanks for being with us as always.